He whispered it in the foyer. 3 hours later, I called my lawyer from his bathroom. By Monday morning, my son had been removed from the document he didn't know I had been holding for 9 years. Here is what actually happened. My name is Eleanor. I am 72. My husband Calvin died in 2016. My son Whitman is 46. He is, by all professional measurements, a successful man, a partner at a regional accounting firm in a city 2 hours north of mine, married for 12 years to a woman named Adelaide, father of a boy named Theo, who was turning 10 on the Saturday this story begins. I had been invited to Theo's birthday party. I had been invited the way I am usually invited to family events since Calvin died by text, late in the week, with the specific suggested arrival time of 1:30 so you can help with the cake. I had said yes. I had driven the 2 hours up. I had brought a wrapped gift, a hand-bound sketchbook with Theo's name embossed in gold on the front, because he had told me at Easter that he wanted to learn to draw. I had brought a tin of the lemon shortbread cookies I had been baking for 40 years. I had worn a soft blue dress and the pearl earrings Calvin had given me on our 30th anniversary. I arrived at 1:27. The driveway was full of cars I did not recognize. The front door was open. Adelaide's voice was coming from the kitchen, bright and a little high, the voice she uses when there are guests she wants to impress. I rang the bell out of habit. I stepped into the foyer. Whitman came down the staircase fast, faster than the moment called for. He stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom. He looked at me. His face did the thing. His face has been doing for the last 3 years. A quick assessment, a calculation, the silent math of what does this look like to whoever is in the next room. He came down the rest of the way. He pulled me into a half hug, close enough that his mouth was near my ear. And he said, very quietly, "Mom, Adelaide's parents are here. They're a big deal. Don't tell anyone you're my mother. Not right now. Just be Eleanor, the family friend, please." He pulled back. He smiled. He said, in a voice loud enough for the kitchen, "Eleanor, so glad you could make it. Theo's going to love the gift." He walked past me into the living room. I stood in the foyer for what was probably 6 seconds and felt like 6 minutes. My hands were holding a sketchbook and a tin of cookies. The cookies were still warm. I could feel the warmth through the metal. I had wrapped them in a clean dish towel before I left the house, because Calvin had always said warm shortbread cookies were the best thing a person could bring to a birthday party. I want to pause here and ask you something honestly. If your 46-year-old son whispered into your ear, in the foyer of his own house, at his own son's birthday party, that you should not tell anyone you were his mother, what would you have done? I think most mothers would have walked back out the front door. I think a few would have started crying. I think a brave handful would have walked into the kitchen and announced, "Hello everyone, I am Whitman's mother, and I have brought cookies." I did not do any of those 3 things. I did something else. I want to tell you what I did, and then I want to tell you what I did 3 hours later, and why. What I did first was this. I smiled. I smiled, because for 60 years I had been smiling through moments like this one. I smiled the way women my age have been smiling at family gatherings since 1963. I walked into the living room. I set the sketchbook on the gift table. I carried the cookies to the kitchen. I introduced myself to Adelaide's mother, a woman in her 60s with very white teeth, a navy blazer, and a wine glass already in hand at 1:31 as Eleanor, a family friend. She shook my hand. She said, "Oh, how lovely. It's so nice when neighbors come to these things." I said, "It is." I noticed Adelaide watching me from across the kitchen. Her face was a careful blank. I noticed she did not correct her mother. I noticed she had been part of the arrangement. I went and sat on the couch. Before I tell you what I did 3 hours later, I need to back up. Because the foyer whisper was not the first thing. The foyer whisper was the last thing in a line of small things. and the small things had been arriving for 3 years. It had started, I think, at Calvin's funeral in 2016. Whitman had given a eulogy. The eulogy had been about Calvin's career, his 31 years at the engineering firm, the patents, the bridges he had consulted on, the awards. The eulogy had not mentioned me. It had not mentioned the 43 years of marriage. It had not mentioned the house we had built, the son we had raised together, the small, ordinary architecture of two people loving each other through ordinary decades. The eulogy had been a resume, and the woman who had been Calvin's wife for 43 years had not been on it. I had thought, at the time, that he was nervous. I had thought, at the time, that grief makes people say strange things. I had thought, at the time, that he would say the things he had not said to me, privately, later that week. He had not. In the summer of 2017, Whitman had married Adelaide. Adelaide came from money, the kind of money that announces itself with restraint, the kind that talks about summers on the Cape and my father's firm and uses charity board as a verb. I had liked Adelaide at first. I had wanted to like her. I had taken her to lunch the month before the wedding and given her a small heirloom pin that had belonged to my mother, a little gold leaf with a freshwater pearl. Nothing valuable, but old and mine and given freely. Adelaide had thanked me. She had worn the pin to her bridal shower. I had not seen it since. In the fall of 2018, Theo had been 3. I had visited for Thanksgiving. Adelaide had introduced me, at the table. As Whitman's mom, Eleanor, she lives down in Lakeland. We don't get to see her too often. The framing had been correct, if a little distant. I had not minded. In the spring of 2020, during the pandemic, Whitman had called me less and less. He had said it was because of everything going on. I had believed him. Everything had been going on, for everyone. In the summer of 2021, I had driven up unannounced one Saturday. I had brought tomatoes from my garden. Adelaide had answered the door in workout clothes. She had not invited me in. She had said, "Eleanor Whitman didn't tell me you were coming. The house is a mess. Can we do dinner next weekend instead?" I had handed her the tomatoes. I had driven home. We had not done dinner next weekend. In the fall of 2022, Whitman had been promoted to partner at his firm. There had been a small celebration dinner at a restaurant in his city. I had not been invited. I had learned about it from a Facebook post a week later. Adelaide had tagged her own parents in the photograph. She had not tagged me, because I was not in the photograph. There had been an empty chair at the table in the background of the picture, and I had stared at that empty chair for a long time on my computer screen one Tuesday evening, and I had told myself I was being sentimental. In the spring of 2023, I had asked Whitman on a phone call whether everything was all right between us. He had said, "Mum, of course it is. I'm just busy. You know how it is." He had used the phrase, "you know how it is," the way men use that phrase, when they are hoping you will accept it, instead of asking the actual question. I had accepted it. I had been accepting it for 9 years. I had been accepting it because I had been holding a document since 2015, a document Calvin had asked me to hold, signed in the year before he got sick, and I had told myself that as long as I was holding the document, the relationship was still recoverable, that the document was not, in fact, the only thing left of the relationship, that I would never need to use it. The document was a trust. A revocable inter vivos trust Calvin and I had established in 2015, into which we had transferred the bulk of our retirement savings, our brokerage accounts, and the deed to the lake house his grandfather had built in 1948. The trust had 2 beneficiaries, Whitman and Whitman's eventual children. Calvin had been emphatic about the structure. He had said, at the time, in the lawyer's office, "Eleanor, if Whitman ever stops being a son, you may remove him from this. You may redirect everything to Theo when Theo arrives, or to charity." The trust is revocable for the duration of your lifetime. You are the sole trustee. Do you understand what I am giving you? I had said yes. I had not, at the time, understood what he was giving me. I had been holding the document for 9 years. I had not yet used it. Today was Saturday. Theo was turning 10. My son had just whispered into my ear that I was a family friend. The document was about to do its first real work. The party was loud. There were 12 adults. There were 8 children. There was a magician who had been hired for the afternoon and who had a small, tense disagreement with Adelaide at 3 o'clock about whether his contract had specified 1 hour or 90 minutes. There was a cake from a bakery I had not heard of. There was champagne for the adults at 2 p.m., which was earlier than I had ever served champagne in my life. I sat on the couch. I watched. I did not introduce myself to anyone except Adelaide's mother. Adelaide's father, a tall man in a navy sport coat with a wine glass that was perpetually 2/3 full, walked past me 4 times without making eye contact. He had been told, I now understood, that I was the neighbour. Theo came over once. He was wearing a paper birthday crown. He sat down beside me on the couch and said, "Grandma, is the sketchbook from you?" I said, "Yes, sweet pea." He said, "I like the gold writing." I said, "Your grandfather and I used to talk about you learning to draw. He would have been very happy that you asked for one." Theo nodded. He squeezed my hand. He went back to his friends. He had called me grandma in front of the room. I noticed Whitman's face. I noticed it for 2 seconds. He had heard. He had not corrected the room. He had not done anything. He had simply looked at me quickly, the same calculation as in the foyer, and then looked away. At 3:47, I stood up. I told Adelaide I needed to use the bathroom. She said, "Use the one upstairs. The powder room is being used." I went upstairs. I did not use the bathroom. I went into Whitman's bathroom, the master bath off the bedroom. He shares with Adelaide, which had been a guest room the last time I had been in this house, and I locked the door. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet. I took out my phone. I called my lawyer. Her name was Beatrix. She had drafted the trust with Calvin and me in 2015. She had been waiting, I now understood, for 9 years. She picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor." "Beatrix, I'm at my son's house. I'm in his bathroom. I have about 11 minutes before someone notices I am gone. I would like to remove Whitman from the trust." She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Eleanor, tell me what happened." I told her, the foyer whisper, the introduction to Adelaide's mother, the neighbour, the champagne at 2, Theo calling me grandma and Whitman not correcting the room. When I had finished, Beatrix was quiet again. Then she said, "Eleanor, I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to answer honestly. Is there any version of this conversation where you are going to call me on Monday and ask me to undo what we are about to do today?" I sat with the question. I sat with it for about 30 seconds, which is a long time in a locked bathroom at a birthday party. Then I said, "No, Beatrix, there is not." "Then, Eleanor, I am going to send you a document by email tonight. It will be the formal amendment to the trust. It removes Whitman as a beneficiary. It names Theo as the sole inheritor of his share, held in a subtrust until he turns 25. The trusteeship for Theo's subtrust will be my firm. Whitman will have no access, no information rights, no control. The amendment takes effect when you sign it. I can have a notary at your house tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. Will you be home? I will be home. Eleanor, one more thing. The lake house. Yes. Calvin specifically named the lake house as a potentially separable asset. If you want, we can transfer it directly into a small charitable foundation in his name, with you as the lifetime executive director. You could spend the next 10 years deciding what the foundation does. Or we can keep it in your name and let Theo inherit it At 25. Your choice. I closed my eyes. I thought about the lake house. I thought about Calvin teaching Whitman to swim there in 1981. I thought about Calvin's grandfather building the dock in 1948. I thought about the wooden sign Calvin had carved with his own hands. The year we got married, Eleanor and Calvin's. Established 1973, and which still hung above the front door of the cabin. I thought about whether I wanted that sign to one day hang in a house where a grown man would whisper that his wife was not his wife to a room full of strangers. I did not. Beatrix set up the foundation, the Calvin Eldridge Foundation. I will be the lifetime director. The foundation will provide small grants to widows over the age of 65 who are caring for grandchildren whose parents have, for whatever reason, withdrawn the family connection. 5,000 a year, 12 grants a year, anonymous, no application required. Identified by referral from local clergy. Make it Calvin's foundation. He would have approved. A small silence. Then Beatrix said, in a voice I had never heard her use, Eleanor. Yes. That is the most beautiful use of an asset I have drafted in 41 years. Beatrix. Yes. Calvin would have applauded. Calvin, she said, would have wept. We hung up. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet for another 2 minutes. I did not cry. My hands didn't tremble. I flushed the toilet so that the sound would suggest, to anyone passing in the hallway, that I had been doing what bathrooms are for. I washed my hands. I dried them on Adelaide's monogrammed towel. I went back downstairs. I sat on the couch. I watched my son finish his second glass of champagne. I stayed for 1 more hour because Theo had not yet cut the cake and I wanted to be there when he did. I sang the happy birthday song. I watched him blow out the candles. I clapped. I ate 1 bite of the cake, which was, in fact, very dry. As 12-year-old Atticus had predicted in a different story, in a different kitchen, and then I stood up and gathered my purse and walked over to Theo and knelt down beside him. Sweet pea. Grandma. I am going to head home. The drive is long. I want you to know I loved seeing you today. I want you to know that the sketchbook is yours. I want you to know that you can call me any time for any reason. Your father knows my phone number. Your father can give it to you whenever you ask. Do you understand? He nodded. Grandma, are you mad? At you, sweet pea. Never. I love you. You did nothing wrong today. I kissed the top of his head. I stood up. I walked past Adelaide in the kitchen. She did not look up and out the front door. Whitman was on the porch on a phone call. He saw me. He held up 1 finger, the universal gesture of just a second important call. I waved at him. I smiled. I walked to my car. I drove home. The first voicemail came at 9:42 p.m. that night. It was Whitman. Mom, I listen. I'm sorry I couldn't talk when you left. Adelaide's dad called and anyway, thank you for coming up today. Theo loved the sketchbook. He talked about it for an hour after you left, about the gold lettering. Just call me sometime this week. Love you. I noted that he had said, Mom. I noted that he had not said, I am sorry I asked you to pretend you weren't my mother in my own foyer. I noted that thank you for coming up today was the apology he had chosen instead. I deleted the voicemail. The second voicemail came at 11:18 p.m. It was Adelaide. This one surprised me. Eleanor, I want to apologize. I want to apologize for many things, and I want to do it now, in a voicemail, because I am not sure I will have the courage in person. I knew about the foyer. Whitman told me on the phone Tuesday what he was going to ask you. I told him not to do it. He did it anyway. And I did not stop the introduction to my mother. I let it happen. I told myself that you would understand, because my parents are difficult, and Whitman is sensitive about how he is perceived around them. That was a lie, I told myself. The truth is that I have been small in your direction for 12 years, and I have used my parents as a reason. Eleanor, I am sorry. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to know that I know what I did and what I have been doing, and that I am going to spend the rest of my marriage trying to do something different. You are Theo's grandmother. You are his only living grandmother. I will not stand between you and him again. I saved that voicemail. I saved it in the folder. I had started keeping the morning after Calvin died, the folder labeled Letters from Women Who Finally Said It. The folder had been growing slowly across the last year. It now had 4 entries. The notary arrived at 3 p.m. on Sunday. Beatrix was with her. The signing took 11 minutes. I signed 3 copies. The notary stamped them. Beatrix took 2 with her. I kept one in the small leather folder Calvin had labelled Trust Original in 1995. On Monday morning at 9:04 a.m., the firm registered the trust amendment with the county. By Monday at 5 p.m., Whitman was no longer a beneficiary of his father's trust. Theo was the sole inheritor of what had been his father's share, held in subtrust until age 25. The lake house had been transferred into the Calvin Eldridge Foundation, of which I was the lifetime executive director. The foundation was registered as a 501c3 on Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, Beatrix had sent the first inquiries to 3 local parish priests in 3 different counties, asking for referrals of widowed grandmothers caring for grandchildren whose parents had withdrawn. The first grant of the Calvin Eldridge Foundation went out on December 12, 8 weeks after Theo's birthday party. It went to a 74-year-old woman in a town 2 hours west of mine. She was raising her granddaughter, age 11, because her son and daughter-in-law had decided it was easier this way for everyone. Her grocery bill that month had been $412. The grant was $5,000. Beatrix told me she cried on the phone for 20 minutes. I made the next 12 grants over the following year. Beatrix selected the recipients. I never met any of them. The grants were anonymous. On the 2nd Saturday of December, which was Theo's 11th week of having a grandmother who was no longer pretending to be a family friend, my phone rang at 10 in the morning. It was Theo. He had figured out my number. I had not given it to him. He had asked his father. His father had credit where credit is due given it to him. Grandma. Sweet pea. Can I come visit you sometime? By myself. On the bus. I looked it up. There's a bus that goes from here to Lakeland. It takes 3 hours. I have my own money. I closed my eyes. Theo. Sweet pea. You do not need to take the bus. I will drive up and get you. Or your father can drive you down. We will arrange it with your parents. Tell me what Saturday you want. Next Saturday. Next Saturday. I want to learn to draw, Grandma, with the sketchbook. I haven't started yet. I wanted to start with you. Sweet pea. We will start next Saturday. I will pick you up at noon. We will draw together until Sunday afternoon. I will bring you home Sunday at 5. Grandma. Yes. Are you mad at Daddy? I sat with the question for a moment. Theo. I am not mad. I am adjusted. Your father did something this fall that hurt me. He has not yet apologized for it in a way that I can accept. Until he does, things between him and me will be quiet. But that has nothing to do with you and me. You and I are going to draw together for as many Saturdays as you want for the rest of my life. Do you understand? Yes, Grandma. Good. Pack your sketchbook. I will see you Saturday. We hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and I called Beatrix. Beatrix, I want to add something to the trust amendment. Yes, Eleanor. In Theo's subtrust, I want to add a clause. On the day Theo turns 18, he is to receive a letter written by me, sealed, dated today, explaining what happened on his 10th birthday, and why his inheritance from his grandfather is held in trust for him separately from his father. I want him to know, when he is old enough to understand, that his grandmother did not abandon his family. I want him to know that I redirected what would have come to his father, because his father had asked me, in a foyer, to pretend I was not his mother. I want him to know that I made the decision so that the inheritance Calvin built would never pass through hands that had whispered me away. A long silence. Then Beatrix said, very quietly, "Eleanor, I will draft the clause tonight." Beatrix. Yes. One more thing. Yes. Calvin would not have wanted that letter to be all anger, so I am going to spend the next 8 years writing it. Slowly. Letter by letter. Updated every year. By the time Theo opens it, the letter will not just be the foyer story. It will be the story of his grandfather, and his grandfather's grandfather, and the Lake House Dock, and the Calvin Eldridge Foundation, and the 12 women a year who have a Christmas because Theo's great-grandfather built a cabin in 1948. I want Theo to understand what was redirected, not just what was taken away. Eleanor. Yes. Calvin would have approved. Calvin, I said, would have helped me write it. That night I sat in Calvin's reading chair with the small notebook I had started keeping the morning after Theo's birthday party, and I wrote one line. At my grandson's birthday, my son whispered, "Don't tell anyone you're my mother." So I told the lawyer instead, and I learned, at 72, that when a son removes you from his own foyer, the most loving thing you can do is remove him from the architecture that will outlive both of you, and redirect everything that mattered to the only person at the party who already knew who you were. Sometimes dignity does not arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in a locked bathroom, on a flushed toilet, in a phone call to a woman who has been waiting for 9 years. Then I closed the notebook, and I drank what was left of my tea, and I slept the way a woman sleeps when she has finally stopped accepting, "You know how it is," as the answer to the question her son was no longer willing to be asked and started. At 72, in her own house, in her own chair, building an inheritance her grandson would one day understand, sentence by sentence, letter by letter, year by year, for the next 8 years of her life.